What's up everybody, Brian here, back in the Gecko lab, bringing you a new video. Today we're talking about 7 lies you've been told about crested geckos, part 3. So like I said, this is part 3 in this series. I've already done 7 lies you've been told about crested geckos, part 1 and 2. If you haven't seen those, check the description box below. I'll put some links so you can check those out. But today we're gonna go over 7 lies you might have heard about crested geckos. Obviously these aren't gonna be things that everybody has been told, but these are things that I've come across through the course of my working through the reptile world. Things that are inaccurate about crested geckos I've either been told or heard said to other people, or just general pieces of common knowledge that aren't accurate. Let's get right into it with the first lie on our list. So the first one we're gonna cover today is, I admit, a heartbreaker. This is always a hard one for people to hear and nobody likes it, and it starts fights in the comments, but we're gonna get into it straight away and get it out of the way because it has to be said. That is the lie that your crested gecko loves you or likes to be handled. This just isn't true, guys. I know it's kind of sad and we all want to think our geckos love us the way we love them. I love my geckos too, but the truth is reptiles' brains just don't operate that way. They don't feel compassion for us, and more importantly in this one, they don't enjoy being handled. They don't need companionship. They don't enjoy your touch the way you enjoy theirs, and that's important to remember because while crested geckos do tolerate handling incredibly well, especially for a reptile, they don't enjoy it. So overhandling them can actually be dangerous. You want to make sure that you're not handling your crested geckos excessively. Now, what do I mean by that? Obviously, if you're taking your gecko out for a few minutes every day and playing with them, that's fine. They get used to that, they tolerate it. They can even learn to associate that with food. They know that when you take them out and handle them, that's usually accompanied by feeding time, and they will associate those two things together. What I mean by not overhandling your crested geckos is I mean don't take your crested geckos to the mall. I've seen people do this. Don't sit on your couch with your crested gecko and watch a movie with him. He does not want to be out cuddled with you on the couch for 2.5 hours. That's not what they do. So that's what I mean by this one. Your crested geckos, they don't feel love for you the way we feel and express love. And more importantly, they don't enjoy being handled, even though they do tolerate it really well. And that's one of the reasons they're such great pets. Moving right along to item number 2 on our list of 7 lies you've been told about crested geckos. Next up, we're going to talk about cohabiting crested geckos with other reptile species. Now, putting more than one crested gecko together is a different issue, but this I'm specifically talking about housing a crested gecko with a different species of animal. I see this a lot, especially in forums and chat groups where people are asking, can I put my crested gecko with this frog or this other lizard or my bearded dragon or whatever it is? You get all kinds of crazy stuff, and once in a while somebody will come in and say, oh yeah, my crested gecko and my green tree frog do great together, or my crested gecko and my green anole are best friends, some ridiculous thing like that. This is super important. Crested geckos should never be housed with a different species, especially frogs. That seems to be the most common one. For some reason, people think a tree frog and a crested gecko can do great together. That's not true. In fact, most frogs have, they're poisonous. Their skin has toxins in it, and the biggest problem is if that frog soaks itself in the water dish. If you provide a water dish for your gecko and the frog soaks in there, the toxins from their skin will get in the water, then your gecko drinks it and it can make them sick or even kill them. So you never want to house a crested gecko with another species. Generally, the care is not the same, the temperatures they need aren't the same. Even if you get another New Caledonian species like a gargoyle gecko or a chihuahua, there can be a lot of aggression issues. It just doesn't end well, and there's no real good way to do it. So that is lie number 2. Despite what anybody tells you, do not house crested geckos with a different species of reptile. Getting into number 3 on our list, the next couple numbers on our list are all going to have to do with temperature requirements for crested geckos. Now, most people know, especially on this channel, that crested geckos generally thrive at about room temperature, anywhere between 70 to 76 degrees, and that is very true. However, sometimes you will hear people say that crested geckos cannot get below 65 degrees or they will die. Now, this just isn't true. Now, while it's optimal for crested geckos to stay between 70 and 76-ish, they can certainly survive temperatures down into the low 50s and lower. Now, disclaimer, that does not mean keep your geckos at 50 degrees and they'll be fine. That's not what you want to do. We want to provide the best life possible for our animals, and to do that, they should be comfortable and happy and thriving, and that happens at about room temperature or a couple degrees above what we call room temperature. However, the big one here is if you are having trouble keeping your house warm during the winter, or you have a power outage when it's cold out or something like that. A lot of people have this happen, and I get panicked messages, and they understandably are super scared, thinking their geckos are not going to survive this issue. The truth of the matter is, crested geckos can survive low temperatures very well. These guys are super hardy. They handle low temperatures even better than hot temperatures. When I ship these guys to people that purchase them from me, I will ship down to really, really low temperatures. In the summer, I'm super careful because shipping in hot temperatures is way more dangerous. I recently had a customer of mine, he was getting a gecko from a different breeder, but we were talking about it. His package got delayed. This was just a few days ago here, and it was super, super cold. His package got delayed, and the gecko showed up. He thought it was dead. It was in the cup, laying on its side, not moving whatsoever, and he hit me up and he said it didn't survive. He was super upset. It was a very, very nice animal he had purchased, but after the gecko started to warm up, the gecko came back to life. It revived itself from being that cold. It started to move again, and after a couple hours of warming up, it was perfectly fine. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be any sort of long-term health issues. That doesn't mean that this is okay for that gecko. This is an extreme example of how they handle cold temperatures, but the general rule, a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way that I've always put it, is really to hurt one of these guys with low temperatures, like you literally have to try to freeze them to death. You can't do it accidentally. They're not going to die just because your temperatures dip into the low 60s like some people will tell you. That's just a lie. They can handle quite a bit when it comes to low temperatures, but that doesn't mean we should do that to them. Keep your geckos at the proper temperature and they'll be happy. So that brings us to lie number 4 on our list today. We're going to stick with temperatures, and now we're going to talk about the opposite. This is the lie that any temperature over 80 degrees will instantly kill your gecko. This one's a lot more common to hear, and it is more serious and more truthful, but still a lie. Crested geckos can survive temperatures over 80 degrees. It is absolutely untrue that as soon as your thermometer hits 80 degrees, your geckos are gonna die. And that's what some alarmists online will have you think. Again, this happens generally during the summer when people are having trouble keeping their houses cool and they worry about the safety of their geckos. Absolutely, you should be worried about the safety of your geckos if things are getting too hot, but it's not as extreme as a lot of people will make you think. Crested geckos can handle brief temperatures well into the high 80s as long as they come back down. Just like on the cold temperatures, this isn't good for them, and this isn't something you should practice, but it is something they are equipped to survive. Now, I want to talk real quick about what to do if your temperatures are getting too high. Say your air conditioning goes out, say you don't have AC, and things are getting too hot in your house. Just because your house temperature is reading 86 degrees or something like that, doesn't mean your gecko itself is 86 degrees. There are a lot of ways to cool your gecko down. They could just move to the bottom of the cage and bury themselves in the substrate. It's usually a few degrees cooler in there. A lot of times you'll see that. You'll also see that if they're looking for more humidity, but we're talking about temperatures here. Another thing you can do is spray their cage and put a fan on it. Just like when we as mammals can keep ourselves cool by sweating. How it works is we sweat, perspiration comes off, your skin gets wet, and then as the air from the outside moves across your skin, it wicks away heat from your body. That's how mammals keep cool. Geckos, reptiles obviously can't sweat. They are not able to regulate their body temperature like we are as mammals, but you can emulate this with your geckos. Spray them with water and put a fan on their tank, and it will have the same effect. The inside of their tank and the gecko itself is covered with water, and you have a light fan going over it, and that will wick the heat away just like it does when you sweat when it's hot outside. So there are things you can do to keep your geckos safe, but don't be terribly alarmed, because if your geckos do get up into those 80-degree temperatures for a brief period of time, they're going to be just fine. All right, we're going to do number 5 now, and I promise this is the last temperature-based one, but this is another one I see, so I wanted to touch on it because it is an interesting one, and that is the idea that crested geckos can survive temperatures into the low 90s because on New Caledonia, the island they come from, it gets into the low 90s. Now, this is a myth that gained popularity a few years ago. There was a popular YouTuber who actually took a trip, a reptile YouTuber who took a trip to New Caledonia and found a wild crested gecko there. And he made the comment in his video that, you know, his video was billed as a, are we keeping crested geckos correctly? I'm gonna go see them in the wild and find out. And one of the points he made was, while he was on the island, it was 92 degrees that day, and he was talking about how, oh, everybody thinks their geckos are going to die if it gets over 80. Well, look at this one, is perfectly alive, and it's 92 degrees out here. Now, that's a dangerous precedent to set, because while it's 90 degrees ambient temperature on the island that day, where that crested gecko is not 90 degrees. When it hits those extreme temperatures, the geckos can find cooler places. They'll go bury themselves under some leaf litter on the forest floor, in some moist soil, in a hollow log. They're not sitting outside on a stick in the daylight at 92 degrees. That's not how it works. So to say that they can survive temperatures into the 90s just because it gets into the 90s on their home island is not true. We don't keep our geckos in a forest where they have an entire forest of places to go and survival tips and tricks that they can use. We keep them in small cages, controlled habitats, and if we're not controlling those habitats to what is best for them, we can cause real damage to our geckos. So it is important to be responsible for your geckos and to act responsibly and take care of them properly. And as backwards as it sounds, trying to emulate their natural environment is not taking care of them properly. For the reasons I just mentioned, also because, well, let's face it, natural geckos in the wild are not nearly as healthy as ours are, because life is hard in the wild. Life is hard. They have to struggle to find food. They have to evade predators. They have to deal with extreme hots and extreme colds. Think about if you lived in the wild. Go outside and try and live in your backyard and forage for food and survive the nights versus being here in your house where we temperature control the environment. We're much happier, healthier, and has easier lives in our house than we do outside. Same thing with keeping your geckos. So keep them happy, keep them healthy, do proper care, practice proper care techniques, and your geckos are going to live a long time and be great companions for you. We're getting close to the end of our list today, and our last two both have to do with breeding and hatching crested geckos. Now, this 6th lie on our list has to do with something called floppy tail syndrome. Now, if you don't know, floppy tail syndrome is an issue where geckos, the muscles at the base of their tail are not strong enough to hold their tail up, and if you can see on this girl, you see how her tail bends up at a right angle there. That's floppy tail syndrome. A lot of time you'll see this when they stick upside down on the glass and their tail will fall over their heads like this, or the very base of their pelvis will kind of have almost a kink or a turn to it because of this. This is fairly common in crested geckos, and the lie that I want to discuss here is the idea that geckos with floppy tail syndrome cannot breed. You generally hear this about females. It's fairly common for people to say that females with floppy tail syndrome are more likely to become egg bound and therefore shouldn't be bred because it's not safe. Egg binding is just a term for when a female is unable to pass her eggs, they get stuck inside her, and it can be life-threatening for geckos. However, floppy tail syndrome is not connected to females becoming egg bound in any way. I've been breeding geckos for 12 years now. I've hatched tens of thousands of offspring, and I have had hundreds of breeding females over the years who have floppy tail syndrome. Not one time have I ever had one of those females become egg bound. It's just not true. it makes a lot of sense when you look at a gecko who has a little weird spot on her pelvis right where the eggs come out to think that that would be an issue, but it's actually not. This is a lie. It's an urban legend of sorts. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about floppy tail syndrome and what it is for you guys, but I'm going to do that in a future video. So hit that subscribe button and we'll get fully into what floppy tail syndrome is, what causes it, and what you can do about it in another video. But all right, everybody, we made it to the end of our list today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, as always, comment down below. I like to interact with you guys as much as I can. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all that. But let's get to our last one on the list. And this one has to do with hatchling crested geckos, like these tiny little charcoal hatchlings I've got here. These guys are only about 3 days old, itty bitty tiny guys. And this is the lie that you can determine the sex of a hatchling based on what temperature you incubate the eggs at. Now, this is not true with crested geckos, though this one does make sense because for a lot of reptiles, this is true. You can temperature sex the eggs during incubation. Higher temperatures generally produce males, lower temperatures produce females. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, I don't know why this works. All I know is that it does work with a lot of species. Crested geckos are not one of those species. It does not matter. Crested gecko eggs are generally incubated anywhere between 70 and 76 degrees. You can put them at 68 degrees, 70 degrees, you're gonna get about a 50-50 ratio. You can put them at 76, 78 degrees, you're gonna get about a 50-50 ratio. It does not matter, it does not make a difference with crested geckos, which is interesting because Leachianus geckos and Chahua geckos, which both are related to cresties and come from the same island, there is evidence that the temperature you incubate at can influence the sex of the hatchlings. But with crested geckos, it's just not true. Doesn't work. Incubate them at whatever temperature works best for you. You're gonna get a 50-50 mix either way. I usually keep mine right between 70 and 72 degrees. All right, guys, that is my last one for today. Like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, I am Brian, Altitude Exotics, altitudeexotics.com and /AE Geckos on Facebook and Instagram. As always, be kind, be safe. I love you guys. I'll see you soon.